Have you ever woken up in your 30s and felt like you're living someone else's life? Like everything you thought you knew about yourself has suddenly become a question mark. Like you're wandering through a forest so dark you can't see the path ahead or even remember how you got there. You're not alone, and you're not broken. 700 years ago, Dante Alighieri opened his masterpiece, The Divine Comedy, with these haunting words. In the middle of the journey of our life, I found myself in a dark wood where the straight way was lost. He was 35 when he wrote this, the exact age when many of us experience what psychologists now call the crisis of meaning. But Dante understood something profound about this darkness that modern self-help culture completely misses. This isn't a problem to be solved quickly with positive thinking or life hacks. This is a sacred passage, a necessary descent that every soul must make to find its true direction. The dark wood isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. And if you're feeling lost right now, confused about your career, your relationships, your purpose, if you're questioning every decision you've made and wondering if you're wasting your life, then you're exactly where you need to be. But here's what nobody tells you about being lost in your 30s. This confusion, this sense of being stuck between who you were and who you're becoming, this feeling that everyone else has figured it out while you're still searching. This is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of awakening. The comfortable certainties of your 20s are crumbling because they were never truly yours to begin with. They were borrowed from parents, society, expectations, and now your authentic self is demanding to be born. Dante's journey through the dark wood wasn't just a poetic metaphor. It was a precise psychological map of transformation. And in this video, we're going to follow that map together. We'll explore why your 30s feel like wandering through a trackless forest, why the old paths no longer work, and most importantly, how to navigate this darkness, not as something to escape from, but as something to journey through with purpose and wisdom. Because on the other side of this confusion lies not just clarity, but a deeper understanding of who you truly are and what you're meant to do in this world. You've been told that by 30, you should have it all figured out. That adulthood means certainty, stability, knowing exactly where you're going and how to get there. But here's the truth that no one prepared you for. The most profound growth happens not when you have all the answers, but when you're brave enough to admit you don't know anything at all. Your 20s were about building an identity, trying on different versions of yourself, collecting achievements and experiences like they were pieces of armor protecting you from uncertainty. You probably followed a script that seemed to make sense. Get educated, find a career, build relationships, accumulate success markers, check off boxes that someone else decided were important. But somewhere in your 30s, that script starts to feel hollow, like you're acting in a play you never auditioned for, speaking lines that don't feel authentic to who you really are. The career you worked so hard to build feels meaningless. Relationships that once excited you now feel draining or superficial. Goals that used to motivate you seem arbitrary and empty. You look around at your life and think, this should be enough. I should be grateful. I should be happy. But instead, you feel restless, disconnected, like you're sleepwalking through your own existence. This is what Dante meant when he described finding himself in a dark wood where the straight way was lost. The straight way represents the conventional path, the route that society laid out for you, the expectations and assumptions about how life should unfold. In your 20s, this path seemed clear. Work hard, build a resume, accumulate experiences, climb ladders, follow the rules of success. But in your 30s, you start to realize that this straight way isn't actually leading you anywhere meaningful. It's just keeping you busy, keeping you distracted from the deeper questions of purpose and authenticity. The dark wood is the space between who you thought you were supposed to be and who you actually are. It's the confusion that arises when external validation stops working, when achievements feel empty, when you realize that you've been living according to someone else's definition of success. And this realization is terrifying because it means admitting that much of what you've built your identity around might be false, that the life you've constructed so carefully might not actually be yours. But here's what Dante understood that we often miss. This dark wood isn't a mistake. It's not a sign that you've failed or taken a wrong turn. It's a necessary passage. Every hero's journey, every story of transformation, every path to authentic selfhood must pass through this darkness. The wood is dark, not because it's evil, but because it's unknown, because it represents the parts of yourself and your potential that you haven't yet explored. In your 30s, you're no longer the person you were in your 20s, but you're not yet the person you're becoming. You're in the liminal space, the threshold, the place between worlds. And this is always disorienting. The old ways of being no longer work, but the new ways haven't yet emerged. The beliefs that guided you feel outdated. The goals that motivated you seem irrelevant. The relationships that sustained you might feel strained or artificial, and society doesn't help. We live in a culture that's terrified of uncertainty, that demands constant productivity and progress, that treats any pause or questioning as failure. We're told to figure it out, to get our act together, to stop wasting time, as if confusion were a character flaw rather than a natural part of growth. But Dante knew better. He knew that some kinds of lostness are actually a form of finding, that some kinds of darkness are necessary for true illumination. The pressure to have everything figured out by 30 is not just unrealistic, it's spiritually impoverishing. It cuts you off from the natural rhythms of growth and transformation. It makes you afraid of uncertainty, when uncertainty is often where the most profound discoveries happen. Your 30s aren't supposed to be about having arrived. They're about learning to navigate complexity, about developing the inner resources to handle ambiguity, about discovering what matters to you when all the external noise is stripped away. So, if you're feeling lost right now, if you're questioning everything, if you feel like you're wandering through a dark wood with no clear path forward, don't rush to fix it. Don't immediately reach for distractions or quick solutions. This darkness has something to teach you. This confusion is trying to show you something important about who you really are and what you really value. But to receive these teachings, you need to understand why the old ways of navigating life no longer work. And that's what we'll explore next. Dante didn't just find himself in the dark wood by accident. He was driven there by 3 beasts that blocked his path to the mountain of enlightenment. A leopard representing lust and superficial desires, a lion symbolizing pride and ego, and a she-wolf embodying greed and insatiable appetite. These weren't external monsters. They were internal forces, aspects of his own psyche that had grown so powerful they were preventing him from living authentically. In your 30s, you encounter your own version of these beasts. Psychological forces that seem to serve you in your 20s, but now stand between you and your true path. The first beast, the leopard of lust and superficial desires, represents the way you've been conditioned to seek validation and meaning from external sources. In your 20s, this might have worked. You could find temporary satisfaction from achievements, purchases, experiences, relationships, the approval of others. But in your 30s, these quick fixes start to lose their power. The dopamine hits become weaker. The emptiness returns faster after each temporary high. You realize you've been chasing shadows, seeking substance in things that are inherently substanceless. This is why so many people in their 30s feel a deep sense of futility, even when their lives look successful from the outside. You might have the career, the relationship, the lifestyle you thought you wanted, but it feels hollow because it was built on the leopard's promises. That external achievement would bring internal peace, that having more would make you feel more complete, that other people's approval could substitute for self-knowledge. The leopard isn't evil, but it's immature. It represents the part of you that still believes happiness can be purchased or earned through conventional means. The second beast, the lion of pride and ego, represents the identity you've constructed around being competent, successful, in control. Your ego served an important function in your 20s. It helped you build confidence, navigate challenges, establish yourself in the world. But in your 30s, the ego's strategies often become obstacles to growth. The lion wants to maintain the image you've built, to protect the narrative of who you think you are, to avoid anything that might threaten your sense of being special or superior or having figured things out. This is why the dark wood feels so threatening to your ego, because admitting you're lost means admitting the limitations of your current identity, acknowledging that there are aspects of life and yourself that you don't understand or control. The lion would rather keep you trapped in a familiar but inauthentic life than allow you to venture into the unknown territory where real growth happens. It whispers that uncertainty is weakness, that not knowing is failure, that changing course means admitting you were wrong. But here's what the lion doesn't understand. True strength comes not from maintaining a rigid identity, but from being flexible enough to evolve, not from knowing everything, but from being comfortable with mystery, not from being right all the time, but from being willing to be transformed by new experience and deeper truth. The lion's version of success is ultimately self-limiting because it's based on maintaining what you already are rather than discovering what you might become. The third beast, the she-wolf of greed and insatiable appetite, represents the part of you that always wants more. More success, more experiences, more possessions, more recognition, more. In a consumer culture, this beast is constantly fed, constantly validated, constantly told that the next purchase, the next promotion, the next relationship, the next experience will finally bring satisfaction. But the she-wolf is never satisfied. She grows hungrier with each feeding. And in your 30s, you start to realize that no amount of external accumulation will ever be enough. This beast is particularly dangerous because it disguises itself as ambition, as drive, as the very qualities that society tells you are necessary for success. But there's a difference between healthy desire and the she-wolf's insatiable hunger. Healthy desire knows when it's satisfied. The she-wolf never does. Healthy desire is connected to authentic values and genuine needs. The she-wolf is driven by comparison, competition, and the illusion that more equals better. When you encounter these three beasts in your 30s, your first instinct might be to fight them, to overcome them through willpower or positive thinking. But Dante learned something crucial. These beasts cannot be defeated by force. They're too powerful, too deeply embedded in human psychology. Instead, they must be understood, acknowledged, and ultimately integrated through a different kind of journey, a descent into the deeper layers of psyche and soul. This is why surface-level solutions don't work for the crisis of meaning that many people experience in their 30s. You can't think your way out of the dark wood. You can't optimize or hack or hustle your way to authentic selfhood. The beasts represent fundamental aspects of human nature that must be met with wisdom and compassion, not resistance and denial. They're not enemies to be destroyed, but teachers to be learned from, guides that show you exactly where you've been unconscious, where you've been living, according to someone else's program, rather than your own deepest truth. The encounter with these beasts is what drives you into the dark wood, because once you see them clearly, once you recognize how they've been influencing your choices and limiting your growth, you can't go back to unconscious living, but you also can't move forward using the same strategies that got you lost in the first place. You need a guide, someone who has traveled this path before and knows the terrain of transformation. For Dante, this guide was Virgil, the Roman poet who represented human wisdom and reason. For you, the guide might be different, but the principle remains the same. Navigating the dark wood requires more than good intentions. It requires wisdom, patience, and a willingness to trust the process, even when you can't see the destination. This is where most people get stuck. They recognize that their old way of living isn't working, but instead of seeking deeper wisdom, they look for new versions of the same old solutions. They change jobs, but not their relationship to work. They end relationships, but not their patterns of relating. They move to new cities, but bring the same internal landscape with them. True transformation requires something different. It requires a guide who can help you understand not just what to do, but how to be. Not just how to solve problems, but how to live with questions. Not just how to achieve goals, but how to discover what's actually worth achieving. When Dante met Virgil in the dark wood, the poet told him something that initially seemed terrible. The way out of the forest wasn't up the mountain toward the light. It was down, through hell and purgatory, through the very depths of human experience. This seemed like the opposite of what Dante wanted to hear, like the worst possible news. But Virgil understood something that Dante didn't yet. Some kinds of darkness can only be healed by going through them, not around them. Some kinds of confusion can only be resolved by diving deeper into the mystery, not by grasping for premature clarity. This is the hardest lesson for people in their 30s to accept, especially if you've been successful according to conventional metrics. Everything in your conditioning tells you to find the quickest route to certainty, to grab onto the first solution that promises to restore your sense of direction and purpose. But the dark wood doesn't respond to quick fixes. It responds to patience, depth, and a willingness to let the journey transform you rather than trying to control where it leads. The descent that Virgil proposed to Dante is a metaphor for the kind of inner work that authentic transformation requires. It means being willing to examine the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore, to face the ways you've been unconscious or inauthentic, to sit with discomfort instead of immediately trying to resolve it. It means understanding that sometimes the path to light leads through darkness, that sometimes the way up is down, that sometimes the cure for being lost isn't finding your way, but learning to navigate lostness with wisdom and grace. In your 30s, this descent might look like therapy, meditation, journaling, creative expression, spiritual practice, or simply taking time for deep reflection without the pressure to immediately produce answers. It might mean stepping away from the constant busyness and achievement orientation that characterized your 20s and allowing yourself to not know, to be uncertain, to sit in the questions without rushing toward conclusions. But here's what makes this descent so difficult in our current culture. We live in an age that's terrified of introspection, that treats any pause or reflection as lost productivity, that demands constant forward motion, even when you don't know where you're going. The message everywhere is to keep moving, keep achieving, keep accumulating, keep improving, as if motion itself were the point rather than the quality of the journey or the authenticity of the destination. This cultural bias against depth and reflection makes the dark wood feel like a problem to be solved rather than a passage to be experienced. But Dante understood that some kinds of lostness are actually a form of finding, that some kinds of descent are necessary for true ascent, that some kinds of darkness are the prelude to a more authentic light. The key is learning to trust the process, to believe that even when you can't see the path, there is intelligence and purpose in the journey itself. And this is where the real work begins, because trusting the process of transformation requires a fundamentally different relationship to uncertainty than most of us have been taught. Instead of seeing not knowing as a problem, you learn to see it as an opening. Instead of experiencing confusion as failure, you begin to recognize it as the birth canal of wisdom. Instead of rushing to escape the dark wood, you start to explore its terrain with curiosity and respect. This shift in perspective is what separates those who get stuck in the crisis of their 30s from those who use it as a catalyst for authentic growth. The ones who get stuck keep looking for external solutions to internal questions. They keep trying to think their way out of what is fundamentally a matter of being and becoming. But the ones who grow learn to befriend uncertainty, to see lostness as a form of openness, to trust that the very discomfort they're feeling is evidence that something deeper and truer is trying to emerge. So, if you're in the dark wood right now, if you're feeling lost and confused and uncertain about your direction, remember that this is not a problem to be fixed quickly, but a passage to be traveled consciously. The darkness you're experiencing isn't evidence of failure. It's evidence that you're growing beyond the limitations of who you used to be. But growing requires patience, wisdom, and the willingness to descend before you ascend, to go through the difficult questions rather than around them, to trust that even lostness can be a form of sacred journey when approached with the right guide and the right understanding. The guide that Dante found in Virgil represents something crucial that most people miss when they're struggling through their 30s. The recognition that transformation isn't a solo journey, that navigating the complex terrain of authentic selfhood requires wisdom beyond what any individual can generate alone. Virgil had already made this journey. He understood the landscape of human transformation. He knew both the dangers and the opportunities that lay ahead, but he also knew his limitations. He could guide Dante through hell and purgatory, through the depths of human experience and the process of purification, but he couldn't accompany him into paradise. That final stage required a different kind of guide altogether. This is a perfect metaphor for how growth actually works in your 30s and beyond. Different phases of development require different kinds of wisdom, different mentors, different approaches. The rational, analytical mind that might have served you well in building a career or navigating practical challenges has its place, but it can only take you so far in the journey of authentic selfhood. There are depths of experience, levels of meaning, dimensions of purpose that require different faculties: intuition, imagination, spiritual insight, emotional intelligence. But here's where many people get stuck. They try to use the same mental tools that help them succeed in their 20s to navigate the existential questions of their 30s and wonder why nothing works. It's like trying to perform surgery with a hammer or compose music with a calculator. The tools aren't wrong, they're just inadequate for the task at hand. You need guides who understand the specific challenges of this phase of life, who have wrestled with questions of meaning and purpose, who know the difference between external achievement and internal fulfillment. These guides might come in many forms: books that speak to your deepest questions, teachers who have walked the path of authentic living, therapists who understand the psychology of transformation, spiritual traditions that offer maps for the journey of awakening, artists and poets who can articulate what you're feeling but can't yet express. The key is recognizing that you don't have to figure everything out alone, that seeking guidance isn't a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. Dante's relationship with Virgil also shows us something important about the nature of authentic guidance. It's not about being given answers, but about being helped to ask better questions. Virgil doesn't solve Dante's problems for him. He doesn't shortcut the difficult journey. He doesn't spare Dante from encountering the challenging aspects of human experience. Instead, he helps Dante understand what he's experiencing, provides context and wisdom for interpreting the journey, offers courage and support for facing what needs to be faced. This is what real guidance looks like when you're lost in your 30s. Not someone who tells you what to do with your life, but someone who helps you understand what your lostness is trying to teach you. Not someone who provides easy answers, but someone who helps you sit with difficult questions until deeper truths emerge. Not someone who eliminates uncertainty, but someone who helps you navigate uncertainty with grace and purpose. The descent that Virgil guides Dante through represents the willingness to face honestly the ways you've been unconscious, inauthentic, driven by forces you didn't understand. In hell, Dante encounters people who have been consumed by their passions and desires, who have let their lowest impulses control their lives. But these aren't distant moral lessons. They're aspects of Dante's own psyche, parts of himself that he needs to understand and integrate, rather than deny or suppress. In your 30s, this descent might involve recognizing how you've been driven by unconscious motivations, seeking approval from people whose opinions don't actually matter to you, pursuing goals that look impressive but don't align with your deeper values, maintaining relationships out of habit rather than genuine connection, avoiding risks that might lead to growth because they threaten your image of competence and control. This process of honest self-examination can be uncomfortable, even painful, because it means acknowledging the gap between who you've presented yourself to be and who you actually are, between what you've claimed to value and what your actions reveal you actually prioritize. But this discomfort is not punishment. It's information. It's your psyche's way of showing you where you've been living unconsciously, where you've been operating according to someone else's program rather than your own authentic nature. The purgatory section of Dante's journey represents the process of purification, the gradual shedding of patterns and habits that no longer serve your growth. This isn't about moral judgment or self-punishment. It's about recognizing what needs to be released in order for something truer to emerge. In your 30s, this might mean letting go of identities you've outgrown, relationships that drain your energy, career paths that don't align with your values, ways of being that were adaptive in your 20s but are now limiting your potential. This purification process requires tremendous patience because it's not something you can rush or force, just as a snake must shed its skin gradually, allowing the new skin to form underneath before the old one is completely released. Psychological transformation happens in its own timing. You can't think your way into a new identity. You can't willpower yourself into authentic living. You can't optimize or hack your way to wholeness. You can only create the conditions for transformation and then trust the process to unfold. But here's what makes this process so challenging in our current cultural moment. We live in an age of instant gratification where every problem is supposed to have a quick solution, where patience is seen as passivity and gradual change is dismissed as insufficient. The message everywhere is to hurry up, figure it out, move on, as if transformation were a task to be completed rather than a process to be lived. This cultural impatience with natural rhythms of growth is one of the reasons why so many people feel stuck in their 30s. They recognize that change is needed, but they want it to happen immediately. They want the clarity and direction without the uncertainty and discomfort. They want the wisdom without the journey. But authentic transformation doesn't work that way. It requires what the mystics call patient endurance, the ability to stay present with difficult processes without trying to control or accelerate them. Dante's journey through hell and purgatory took time. It required facing difficult truths and gradually releasing old patterns. It demanded both courage and patience, but it was this very process, this willingness to descend before ascending, that prepared him for the final stage of the journey, the encounter with paradise, with a vision of life that was not just free from suffering, but actively fulfilling. Not just absence of confusion, but presence of deep meaning and purpose. This is the promise that lies on the other side of the dark wood. Not just clarity about what you don't want, but vision of what you do want. Not just relief from confusion, but excitement about possibility. Not just absence of lostness, but presence of direction that comes from deep within, rather than imposed from without. But reaching this stage requires completing the earlier phases of the journey. It requires being willing to descend into uncertainty, to face honestly what needs to be faced, to release gradually what needs to be released. And this brings us to perhaps the most important insight from Dante's journey, the recognition that the dark wood, the descent, the process of being lost and found is not a detour from your real life, but the very heart of it. This is not something to get through quickly, so you can return to normal living. This is the initiation into a deeper kind of existence, the passage from unconscious to conscious living, the transformation from a life driven by external expectations to a life guided by internal wisdom. When Dante finally emerged from the underworld and began his ascent up the mountain of purgatory, he was not the same person who had entered the dark wood. The journey had changed him fundamentally, not by adding new information or skills, but by transforming his very being, his capacity to perceive reality, his ability to respond to life from depth rather than surface. He had learned to navigate uncertainty with faith, to face difficulty with courage, to trust the intelligence that guides transformation even when the destination isn't visible. This is what awaits you on the other side of your own dark wood. Not just answers to your current questions, but a transformed capacity to live with questions. Not just solutions to your current problems, but a deeper relationship to life that makes problems less threatening and more instructive. You will still face challenges. You will still encounter uncertainty, but you will meet them from a different place, with different resources, with the kind of inner stability that comes not from having everything figured out, but from trusting your ability to navigate whatever arises. But to reach this place, you must first be willing to trust the dark wood itself, to believe that your current lostness is not evidence of failure, but preparation for a more authentic way of being. You must be willing to seek guidance, not in the form of quick fixes, but in the form of wisdom that can accompany you through the depths of transformation. You must be willing to descend before you ascend, to face what needs to be faced, to release what needs to be released. The journey through the dark wood is not easy, but it is necessary, and it is ultimately rewarding in ways that cannot be imagined from the beginning of the journey. Dante could not have conceived, while lost and confused in that dark forest, the vision of reality that awaited him at the end of his travels. Similarly, you cannot yet imagine the life that is waiting for you on the other side of your current confusion, the depth of purpose and meaning that becomes possible when you stop trying to live according to someone else's map and start trusting the intelligence that guides authentic transformation. Your 30s are not a mistake. Your confusion is not a failure. Your lostness is not a problem to be fixed quickly, but a passage to be traveled consciously. The dark wood is not your enemy, but your teacher, not a place to escape from, but a place to journey through with patience and wisdom. And on the other side of this journey lies not just clarity, but vision, not just direction, but purpose, not just answers, but a transformed capacity to live the questions themselves with grace and depth and authentic joy. The path through the dark wood is ultimately a path toward freedom, toward the kind of life that is truly yours, rather than borrowed from others' expectations, toward the deep satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with your authentic nature, rather than in pursuit of external validation. But this freedom must be earned through the journey itself, through the willingness to be lost until you are found, to descend until you are ready to ascend, to trust the darkness until you discover the light that was always waiting within it. So, if you find yourself lost in your 30s, if you're wandering through your own dark wood, feeling confused and uncertain, and questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself and your life, remember Dante's words and trust the journey. This is not the end of your story, but the beginning of a deeper chapter, not a sign that you've failed, but evidence that you're ready to grow beyond who you've been into who you're meant to become. The way forward leads through, not around, and the guide you need is already waiting to meet you in the depths of your own authentic seeking.